The early morning sun cast long shadows across Pioneer Square in downtown Seattle. Marcus Johnson sat quietly on his usual wooden bench, watching the busy morning crowd rush to their offices with coffee cups in hand. His worn gray hoodie and old jeans helped him blend in with the other homeless people in the area. But Marcus was different, very different. At just 35 years old, Marcus Johnson was the secret owner of Tech Future Solutions, one of Seattle's fastest-growing technology companies. His net worth stood at $48 million, yet here he was, sitting on a cold bench with a paper cup in front of him. Few would guess that the man in shabby clothes had 3 luxury cars parked in his garage or that he owned a beautiful lakeside mansion. Marcus adjusted his position on the bench, feeling the hardness of the wood through his thin clothes. He had started this social experiment 23 days ago, leaving behind his comfortable life to understand what homeless people went through every day. The experience had opened his eyes in ways he never expected. "Here you go, brother," a kind-faced woman said, dropping a few dollars in his cup. Marcus smiled gently and thanked her. He kept all the money people gave him in a separate pocket, planning to donate it to the local homeless shelter along with a matching amount from his own funds. The morning grew busier as more people filled the streets. Some people looked right through him, while others quickened their pace as they walked past. A few kind souls would nod or smile, and some even stopped to share food or spare change. Marcus carefully observed and remembered every reaction, taking mental notes for his foundation's upcoming projects. A group of businessmen walked past, their expensive suits reminding Marcus of his own closet full of designer clothes. He overheard bits of their conversation about stock prices and market trends. Just 3 weeks ago, he had been just like them, discussing million-dollar deals in corporate boardrooms. Now, he was learning more valuable lessons sitting on this bench than he ever did in those meetings. Marcus pulled out a small notebook from his backpack, one of the few items he carried with him. Using a stubby pencil, he wrote down his observations about how people treated the homeless. He had filled almost 3 notebooks already with similar notes. These would help him design better programs for his charitable foundation, which he planned to expand after this experience. The cold morning air made him pull his hoodie closer. A mother walking with her young daughter passed by, and the little girl waved at him. Marcus waved back, smiling warmly. The mother quickly pulled her daughter away, whispering something about staying away from strangers. His heart felt heavy, not because of the mother's reaction to him, but because he had seen this happen to many actual homeless people over the past weeks. Around 10 o'clock, Marcus watched as the owner of the nearby coffee shop swept the sidewalk, throwing suspicious glances in his direction. The owner had been uncomfortable with Marcus's presence since day one, even though Marcus never caused any trouble. He simply sat quietly, observing and learning. A police car drove slowly past his bench for the 3rd time that morning. Marcus noticed how the officer inside kept looking at him. He had learned that this was common. Police often paid extra attention to homeless individuals, especially those of color. Even though Marcus knew who he really was, these moments still made him uncomfortable. He reached for his water bottle, a basic plastic one, unlike the expensive filtered water he used to carry. Taking a small sip, he watched as another businessman walked past, this one talking loudly on his phone about a $1 million deal. Marcus smiled to himself, knowing that just yesterday, his company had closed a deal 10 times bigger than that. But right now, he wasn't Marcus Johnson, the millionaire tech entrepreneur. He was just another homeless man on a bench, invisible to most of the rushing crowd. The sun climbed higher in the sky as the morning went on. Marcus shifted on his bench, feeling grateful that he could choose to end this experience whenever he wanted, unlike the truly homeless people he had met and befriended over the past weeks. Their stories, struggles, and incredible resilience had touched his heart deeply. He knew that after this experiment, he would never see the world the same way again. Little did Marcus know that this ordinary morning was about to turn into something extraordinary, something that would change not just his life, but the lives of many others in ways he never imagined. The afternoon sun beat down on Pioneer Square as Officer James Barrett started his patrol shift. He was already in a bad mood after arguing with his supervisor about complaints against him. This was his 3rd warning about being too aggressive with minorities, but Barrett didn't think he was doing anything wrong. Officer Barrett noticed Marcus immediately. From his patrol car, he watched the homeless man sitting quietly on the bench, writing in his notebook. The coffee shop owner had called the police station again, complaining about suspicious activity. Barrett smiled to himself, This was exactly the kind of situation he enjoyed handling. Parking his police car, Barrett adjusted his uniform and walked toward Marcus with heavy steps. His hand rested on his belt, close to his weapon, even though Marcus was clearly not a threat. Several people on the street noticed Barrett's aggressive approach and slowed down to watch. "Hey you!" Barrett shouted from 15 feet away. "What are you doing here? We've had complaints about you loitering." His voice was loud and harsh, meant to intimidate. Marcus looked up calmly from his notebook. "Good afternoon, officer," he said politely. "I'm just sitting here, not causing any trouble." His voice was steady and educated, which seemed to annoy Barrett even more. "Let me see some ID," Barrett demanded, now standing over Marcus and casting a shadow across his face. When Marcus reached slowly for his backpack to get his wallet, Barrett's hand tightened on his weapon. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus froze, his heart beating faster. He had seen this kind of treatment before during his experiment, but experiencing it firsthand was different. "Officer, I'm just reaching for my ID, as you requested," he explained calmly. "Don't tell me what you're doing," Barrett snapped. "Stand up. Hands against the wall." He pointed to the nearby building. Several pedestrians had stopped to watch now, and some had taken out their phones to record. Marcus stood up slowly, his hands raised. "Officer, I have the right to sit here. I'm not breaking any laws." He kept his voice steady, even though his heart was racing. He could have revealed his true identity right then, but he knew this moment was important. It was exactly why he had started this experiment. "Oh, so now you're a lawyer?" Barrett mocked, stepping closer. "Typical. You people always think you know the law." The racist undertone in his voice was clear, making some of the onlookers gasp. A young woman stepped forward. "Officer, he's not doing anything wrong. He's always peaceful. I pass by here every day." Barrett turned to her with a glare that made her step back, but she kept recording with her phone. The coffee shop owner came out to watch, looking uncomfortable now that he saw how the situation was developing. He hadn't expected this level of aggression when he made the complaint. "Last warning," Barrett growled, reaching for his handcuffs. "Hands against the wall, or things are going to get very unpleasant for you." His face was red with anger, especially because Marcus remained calm and dignified. Marcus looked around at the growing crowd. He saw phones recording, concerned faces, and some people making calls, probably to the police station or local news. He knew this moment could help expose the kind of treatment many homeless people, especially those of color, face daily. "Officer," Marcus tried one more time, "I understand you're doing your job, but I have rights. I'd like to talk to your supervisor." His words were respectful but firm. This seemed to push Barrett over the edge. "That's it," he shouted, lunging forward. "You're under arrest for resisting an officer and disturbing the peace." The irony was that the only person disturbing the peace was Barrett himself. The crowd grew larger, their phones recording every second. Some people shouted at Barrett to stop, while others called 911 to report his behavior. The coffee shop owner had disappeared back inside, probably regretting his complaint. Marcus remained still, his mind racing. He could end this all with one phone call, but something told him to wait. This was no longer just about his social experiment. It was about documenting a reality that many faced every day, and he was in a unique position to expose it. As Barrett reached for his handcuffs, neither man knew that this confrontation would soon become national news, changing both their lives forever. The truth about Marcus's identity was about to explode into public view, but for now, he was just another victim of prejudice and power abuse. Everything happened quickly after Officer Barrett pulled out his handcuffs. He grabbed Marcus's arm roughly, twisting it behind his back with unnecessary force. Marcus winced but didn't resist, knowing that staying calm was crucial in this dangerous moment. "Stop resisting," Barrett shouted, even though Marcus wasn't fighting back at all. The crowd of onlookers had grown to about 30 people now, and almost everyone had their phones out, recording the unfair arrest. The afternoon sun made everything clearly visible in their videos. "I'm not resisting, Officer Barrett," Marcus said calmly, reading the name tag on the officer's uniform. "But you're hurting my arm unnecessarily." The handcuffs clicked shut too tightly around his wrists, making him grimace in pain. A young man in a business suit stepped forward from the crowd. "This is wrong. He hasn't done anything." The man held his phone steady, making sure to capture every detail. I'm sending this straight to the news stations. Barrett's face turned even redder with anger. Everyone stay back, he shouted. This is police business. If anyone interferes, they'll be arrested too. But his threats only made more people gather around, determined to witness and record his actions. Sarah Chen, a local news reporter, happened to be walking by on her lunch break. She quickly pulled out her professional camera and started filming. This is Sarah Chen from Channel 7 News, she said into her phone, recording a live video. I'm witnessing what appears to be a concerning arrest in Pioneer Square. Marcus could have ended everything by revealing his identity. He could have mentioned his company's name or called his lawyer, but he thought about all the homeless people who didn't have these options. They faced this kind of treatment every day with no way to protect themselves. He decided to stay quiet a little longer. You're making a big mistake, officer, Marcus said quietly, looking Barrett directly in the eyes. This is a clear case of racial profiling and abuse of power. His educated way of speaking seemed to make Barrett even angrier. Shut up, Barrett snapped, pushing Marcus roughly toward the police car. You can explain all that to the judge. I'm sure they'll love hearing from another street lawyer. His sarcasm was thick with prejudice. The coffee shop owner watched from his doorway, looking increasingly worried. He approached Officer Barrett nervously. Officer, maybe this isn't necessary. He's never actually caused any problems. Stay out of this. Barrett cut him off. You're the one who called about a suspicious person. I'm just doing my job. The owner backed away, clearly regretting his complaint now. An elderly woman in the crowd was on the phone with the police station. Yes, I need to report Officer Barrett again, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. He's abusing his power right here in Pioneer Square. There are at least 30 witnesses. We'd all have videos. Marcus stood calmly by the police car as Barrett prepared to put him in the back seat. He could feel his expensive watch hidden under his sleeve, a small reminder of his real life. In his pocket was a phone that could contact some of the most powerful people in Seattle. But he waited. A young law student in the crowd shouted out, Sir, don't say anything more. I've called the public defender's office. They're sending someone right now. She didn't know that Marcus had a team of the city's best lawyers on speed dial. Barrett opened the police car's back door and roughly pushed Marcus inside. The crowd's angry voices grew louder. Some people were calling more news stations, others were calling the police station to complain, and a few were even following the police car on foot. As Barrett started the car, Marcus caught a glimpse of his own reflection in the window. He saw past his messy beard and worn clothes to the Millionaire tech CEO underneath. Soon, very soon, Officer Barrett would realize the massive mistake he had made. But for now, Marcus stayed in character, experiencing what thousands of homeless people went through. The police car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind an angry crowd and dozens of videos that would soon go viral. What Officer Barrett didn't know was that his next stop at the police station would change his life forever. The truth about Marcus's identity was about to explode into the open, and nothing would ever be the same. Officer Barrett marched Marcus through the police station doors, still gripping his arm tightly. The fluorescent lights at the station revealed the red marks the handcuffs had left on Marcus's wrists. Several officers looked up from their desks, watching Barrett drag in what they assumed was just another homeless man. Sit there and don't move, Barrett ordered, pushing Marcus toward a hard plastic chair near the booking desk. Marcus sat down calmly, a slight smile forming on his face. He knew everything was about to change. I'd like to make my phone call now, Marcus said politely. Barrett laughed and shook his head. You'll get your call when I'm good and ready, he replied, starting to fill out the arrest paperwork. Sergeant Wilson, Barrett's supervisor, walked over with a concerned look on his face. Barrett, we're already getting calls about this arrest. Multiple witnesses are saying you used excessive force on a peaceful homeless man. He was resisting, Barrett lied, not looking up from his paperwork. And the coffee shop owner complained about him loitering. Marcus stayed quiet, watching the scene unfold. Just then, the station's front doors burst open. A well-dressed woman in an expensive suit walked in quickly, followed by two men carrying briefcases. I'm Catherine Martinez, Chief Legal Counsel for Tech Future Solutions, she announced loudly. I'm here for Marcus Johnson. Barrett barely looked up. Never heard of them. This homeless guy needs to be processed first. He continued writing on his form. Catherine smiled sharply. Officer Barrett, look at the man you just arrested. Really look at him. Her voice was calm but commanding. Barrett turned toward Marcus, who was now sitting straight in his chair, his whole demeanor changing. Even in the old clothes, something about him suddenly seemed different, more powerful. I'm Marcus Johnson, CEO of Tech Future Solutions. Marcus said clearly, his voice carrying across the now silent station. A homeless man you just roughly arrested is worth $48 million. The booking paperwork slipped from Barrett's hands, scattering across the floor. Sergeant Wilson's mouth fell open. Other officers stood up at their desks, staring in shock. That's impossible, Barrett stammered, his face turning pale. But Marcus was already standing up, his confident posture making his shabby clothes look strangely out of place. The station doors opened again. This time, Marcus's entire executive team walked in. 5 people in expensive business suits, all looking very serious. Behind them came 2 news crews who had followed the story from Pioneer Square. I've been conducting a social experiment, Marcus explained, while Catherine gently removed his handcuffs with a key she'd gotten from the shocked Sergeant Wilson. Living as a homeless person to understand their experiences. Officer Barrett just gave me a very clear demonstration of the prejudice they face. Barrett fell into a nearby chair, realizing the magnitude of his mistake. The news cameras were rolling, capturing every moment. Sergeant Wilson was already on the phone with the police chief, speaking in urgent whispers. Mr. Johnson has been a major donor to the police department's community outreach programs, Catherine added loudly, making sure everyone heard. He's helped fund better training and community relations for the past 5 years. Marcus rubbed his wrists where the handcuffs had been too tight. I'd like to see all the body camera footage, he said calmly, along with Officer Barrett's complete record of complaints. My foundation is very interested in addressing police bias. The station had become chaotic. More reporters were arriving, having heard about the Millionaire CEO arrested as a homeless man. Police officials rushed in from their offices, trying to control the situation. Barrett sat in his chair, looking like he might be sick. We'll be filing a formal complaint, Catherine announced, handing Barrett a thick envelope of papers. But more importantly, we'll be using this incident to create change. Mr. Johnson's experiment has exposed exactly what we needed to see. Marcus finally pulled out his expensive phone from his tattered coat pocket. The contrast between his worn clothes and the latest model smartphone made several officers shake their heads in disbelief. He had dozens of missed calls from his team, who had been alerted by witnesses from Pioneer Square. As reporters crowded around asking questions, Marcus stayed focused on Barrett. Officer, he said quietly, I hope this teaches you what I learned out there. Never judge someone by how they look or where they sit. The next homeless person you see might not be a millionaire, but they deserve the same respect you give one. The morning after Marcus's arrest, the story exploded across every news channel. Videos of the incident had gone viral overnight, with millions of views on social media. The headlines were everywhere. Millionaire CEO arrested while posing as homeless man, and tech executive exposes police discrimination through social experiment. Marcus sat in his luxurious office at Tech Future Solutions, watching the news coverage on multiple screens. He had changed back into his usual expensive suit, but he kept the worn hoodie from his experiment hanging on his office wall as a reminder. Mr. Johnson, CNN is on line 1, and Good Morning America wants you for tomorrow's show, his assistant Sarah announced, rushing into the office. Also, your story is trending #1 on Twitter, and people are calling you a hero. The main video of his arrest, recorded by the law student, had been shared millions of times. In it, Officer Barrett's aggressive behavior was clear for everyone to see. The contrast between his harsh treatment and Marcus's calm responses made the video even more powerful. Look at this, Marcus said to Sarah, pointing to his computer screen. People all over the country were sharing their own stories of discrimination. The hashtag Justice for Homeless was trending, with thousands of people demanding better treatment for homeless individuals. Local news vans camped outside the police station, where Officer Barrett had been placed on immediate leave pending investigation. The police chief had called an emergency press conference to address the situation. As of this morning, we are launching a full investigation into Officer Barrett's conduct, the police chief announced on live television. We are also reviewing our entire department's policies regarding homeless individuals and racial bias. Marcus's phone kept ringing with calls from major newspapers, TV shows, and even politicians wanting to discuss the incident. But he was most interested in the messages from homeless advocacy groups and civil rights organizations. "We have an opportunity here," Marcus told his executive team during an emergency meeting. "This isn't just about one bad officer, it's about changing how society treats its most vulnerable members." The company's PR team had set up a press conference in their main conference room. Reporters filled every seat, their cameras focused on Marcus as he walked to the podium. He had purposely grown his beard back out a little, helping people recognize him from the arrest videos. "What happened to me is what happens to countless homeless individuals every day," Marcus began, his voice firm and clear. "The only difference is that I had the resources to fight back. Most people don't." As he spoke, more videos from his experiment began circulating online. Security cameras from the coffee shop showed him quietly sitting and writing in his notebook. Other clips showed him helping elderly people with their groceries and sharing his food with other homeless individuals. Social media exploded with reactions. Celebrities started sharing the story. Politicians called for new laws protecting homeless rights. Other business leaders praised Marcus's bravery and promised to start their own community initiatives. "Your foundation's website crashed from too many visitors," Sarah reported, rushing in with another update. "Everyone wants to know how they can help. We've received over $1 million in donations since morning." The afternoon news showed interviews with people who had interacted with Marcus during his experiment. The kind woman who often gave him money cried when she learned his true identity. The coffee shop owner publicly apologized, promising to change how he treated homeless customers. Officer Barrett's previous complaints became public record. Other victims of his discrimination came forward, strengthening the case against him. The police department announced mandatory sensitivity training for all officers, using Marcus's case as an example. "Mr. Johnson," a reporter asked during the press conference, "what made you decide to reveal your identity at that exact moment in the police station?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "I could have revealed who I was earlier and avoided arrest. But then we wouldn't be having this important conversation about discrimination and dignity. Sometimes, the hardest moments create the biggest opportunities for change." By evening, the story had reached international news. Marcus's experiment had become more than just a viral video. It was turning into a movement. As he watched the continued coverage, he knew that tomorrow would bring even more opportunities to create real change in how society treated its most vulnerable members. 2 weeks after the arrest, Officer James Barrett sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the TV that kept showing the viral videos of him arresting Marcus Johnson. His police badge and uniform hung untouched in the closet. He was still on suspension pending the department's investigation. The doorbell rang, making Barrett jump. When he opened the door, he was shocked to see Marcus Johnson standing there, wearing a simple but expensive suit. 2 security guards waited at a respectful distance. "Officer Barrett," Marcus said calmly, "may I come in? I think it's time we had a real conversation." Barrett stepped back, surprised and nervous, but nodded and let him in. "I'm not here to ruin your life," Marcus said, sitting down on Barrett's worn couch. "I'm here to offer you a chance to be part of the solution." Barrett sat across from him, looking confused and tired. "Why would you want to help me?" Barrett asked quietly. "After what I did to you." His hands were shaking slightly as he spoke. Marcus leaned forward. "Because change has to start somewhere. You're not the only officer with biases, but you can be one of the first to openly face them and work to change." Meanwhile, across town at the police station, workers were installing new training equipment in a room with a sign that read, "Community Relations and Bias Prevention Center," funded by Tech Future Solutions Foundation. Marcus explained his plan to Barrett. Instead of pressing charges, he wanted Barrett to help develop a new police training program. Barrett would share his story and help other officers recognize and overcome their own prejudices. But first, Marcus said firmly, "You need to do the experiment yourself. 1 week living on the streets, just like I did. Experience what it feels like to be judged, ignored, and treated as less than human." Barrett's face showed fear, then understanding. "You want me to become homeless? For a week?" His voice trembled slightly. With full security watching to keep you safe, Marcus assured him. Sometimes we need to walk in someone else's shoes to truly understand their journey. The next day, Barrett started his own experiment. He wore old clothes and sat on the same bench where he had arrested Marcus. People who recognized him from the news walked past, whispering and pointing. Some took pictures. Throughout the week, Barrett experienced everything he had put others through. Store owners asked him to leave their shops. Police officers, his own colleagues, told him to move along without looking him in the eye. He felt invisible, feared, and unwanted. At night, in the special shelter Marcus had arranged, Barrett wrote in his journal about his experiences. His writings would later become part of the training program, showing other officers how quickly their views could change when they saw life from the other side. Marcus visited Barrett at the shelter on the last day of his experiment. He found the officer looking tired but different, humbled and more aware. "What have you learned?" Marcus asked simply. Barrett wiped tears from his eyes. "I learned that I've been wrong my whole career. I've been judging people without knowing their stories. I've been part of the problem, but now I want to be part of the solution." The next week, Barrett gave his first speech to a room full of police officers. Standing next to Marcus, he shared his story, both as the officer who made a terrible mistake and as the man who learned from it by living on the streets. "I was wrong," Barrett told his fellow officers, his voice strong with emotion. "But we can all learn to be better. We can learn to see people, really see them, instead of just seeing our own prejudices." Marcus watched from the side of the stage, remembering the angry officer who had arrested him just weeks ago. Barrett was still on suspension, but he was doing something more important now. He was helping to change the system from within. The local news covered Barrett's transformation story. Many people were skeptical at first, but as they watched him work with homeless communities and speak honestly about his past mistakes, attitudes began to change. His journey from part of the problem to part of the solution became an example for others to follow. 3 months after the arrest incident, Marcus Johnson sat in his office reviewing the incredible changes his experiment had created. His assistant brought in a thick folder filled with newspaper clippings and photos showing how their city had transformed. "Sir, you won't believe this," its assistant said excitedly. 10 more business leaders across the country have started their own undercover boss programs to understand homelessness in their cities. She spread out articles from different newspapers showing CEOs sleeping on streets and experiencing life as homeless people. Marcus picked up the morning's newspaper. The front page showed a photograph of Officer Barrett, now working as a trainer in the police department's new Dignity First program. Barrett was teaching other officers how to treat homeless people with respect and understanding. "The same officer who arrested me is now teaching others not to make his mistakes," Marcus said to himself, smiling at how things had changed. The newspaper article mentioned that complaints against police have dropped by 70% since the new training started. Across the city, new changes were visible everywhere. The coffee shop that had called the police on Marcus now had a sign in its window. "Everyone welcome here. Free coffee and warmth for those in need." Inside, comfortable chairs and charging stations were available to anyone who needed them. Marcus's company had opened 5 new centers called Fresh Start Hubs. These buildings provided showers, clean clothes, job training, and computer access to homeless people. Each hub also had counselors to help people find jobs and housing. "Yesterday, we helped 15 people get jobs," reported Maria, who ran the downtown hub. "And 3 of them were hired by your company's partners." She showed Marcus photos of smiling people in their new work uniforms, proud to have a fresh start. The city's other wealthy business owners had joined Marcus's mission. Together, they created a fund worth $50 million to build affordable housing. Construction had already started on 3 new buildings that would provide homes for hundreds of families. Local schools were teaching students about homelessness in a new way. Instead of seeing homeless people as strangers to fear, children learned about the many reasons people might lose their homes. They wrote letters of support and collected supplies for shelters. "Dear Mr. Johnson," read one letter from a 4th grade class. "Thank you for showing us that we shouldn't judge people by how they look. Our class raised $200 for the homeless shelter." The letter was decorated with colorful drawings of people helping each other. The police department had completely changed its approach. Officers now carried cards with information about shelters and services instead of just moving people along. They worked with social workers to help homeless people find the right resources. "Remember when I arrested you?" Officer Barrett said during a training session Marcus attended. "I was so wrong. Now I know that every person has a story, and every story deserves to be heard." The other officers nodded, taking notes and asking questions about better ways to help people. Marcus's experiment had even inspired changes in other cities. Mayors from Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago had called him to learn about his programs. They wanted to copy Seattle's new approach to helping homeless people. The local news station ran a weekly show called Street Stories, where homeless people could share their experiences. These stories helped change how people thought about homelessness. Viewers learned that many homeless people had jobs, families, and dreams just like everyone else. 6 months ago, I was afraid to look homeless people in the eye, said one woman interviewed on the show. Now I volunteer at the Fresh Start Hub twice a week. I learned that we're all just people trying our best. Marcus's own company had hired 30 formerly homeless people. They worked in different departments, from maintenance to computer programming. Their success showed other companies that giving people a chance could change lives. "The best part isn't the big changes," Marcus told a reporter. "It's the small ones. It's seeing people smile at each other instead of looking away. It's watching a police officer help someone find shelter instead of telling them to move. It's knowing that every person matters." His words proved that sometimes one person's choice to understand others could start a wave of change that grew bigger than anyone expected. 1 year had passed since the day Officer Barrett arrested Marcus Johnson on that bench in Pioneer Square. On a bright morning, hundreds of people gathered in the same square for a special ceremony. The mayor was about to present Marcus with the city's highest honor for community service. Marcus sat on the stage, wearing one of his expensive suits, but with something special added. He had pinned the old button from his homeless experiment jacket to his lapel. Next to him sat Officer Barrett, now promoted to Chief of Community Relations, wearing his police uniform with new pride. 1 year ago, a terrible mistake led to an amazing change, the mayor said into the microphone. Today, we celebrate not just Marcus Johnson's courage, but our entire city's transformation. The crowd included faces from every part of the story. The coffee shop owner stood near the front, his shop now famous as the city's first community cafe, where paying customers could buy extra meals for those who couldn't afford them. "Last month alone, we served over 3,000 free meals," he told a reporter proudly. "And the best part is, people don't just get food. They get respect and friendship too." Marcus walked to the podium to give his speech. He looked at the bench where he had sat 1 year ago, now painted with beautiful colors and bearing a golden plaque. The plaque read, "This bench changed our city. Let it remind us to never judge others by their appearance." "When I started my experiment," Marcus began, "I thought I would learn about being homeless. Instead, I learned about being human. We all did." He pointed to the new buildings visible from the square, 3 gleaming towers of affordable housing that his foundation had helped build. Officer Barrett stood up next to speak. He looked very different from the angry officer who had made that wrongful arrest 1 year ago. His face was softer, his smile genuine. "I was the worst example of a police officer," Barrett admitted to the crowd. "Now, I hope I'm becoming one of the best examples of how people can change." The new officers he had trained clapped loudly, many of them wearing special badges that said, "Dignity First." The statistics told an amazing story. In just 1 year, police complaints had dropped by 85%. Over 1,000 homeless people had found permanent homes. More than 500 had gotten stable jobs. 20 new businesses had joined the community support program. 5 other cities had copied Seattle's new programs. But the best changes were the ones you couldn't count. People no longer crossed the street to avoid homeless individuals. Police officers stopped to chat with people on benches instead of telling them to move. Store owners offered water and restrooms to anyone who needed them. Marcus's foundation had grown huge. They now had programs in 50 cities across the country. Other wealthy business leaders had joined his mission, creating a network of support that helped thousands of people every day. "Remember when you arrested me?" Marcus asked Barrett quietly during the ceremony. "Could you have imagined we'd be here today?" Barrett shook his head, smiling. "I was so wrong back then. But you showed me a better way. You showed everyone a better way." The ceremony ended with a surprise announcement. Marcus revealed that his company was starting a new program called Second Chances, offering job training and guaranteed employment to 1,000 homeless people each year. But the real change, Marcus said in his closing speech, isn't in the buildings we built or the programs we started, it's in our hearts. We've learned to see each other as human beings first. Nothing else matters. As the crowd cheered, a young girl walked up to the stage. She was carrying a small plant in a pot. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "my class grew this to plant near your bench. Mom says it's like our city. With care and kindness, beautiful things can grow anywhere." Marcus smiled, remembering all the events that had led to this moment. From a simple experiment to a citywide transformation, from an unjust arrest to a lasting friendship with Barrett, from ignorance to understanding, the changes had grown like that little plant, spreading roots of kindness throughout the community. As he helped the girl plant her gift near the famous bench, Marcus knew that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter where every person could walk the streets with dignity and where judgment had been replaced with understanding.